Looks like we have a few people that have joined us already. Just an FYI, we are going to give a few minutes for everyone to try to get logged on here, and then we will be jumping in shortly. Thank you. For anyone just joining us, we are going to just give it a few more minutes just to see who else is trying to hop on right now, and then we'll get started. Thank you so much for your patience. All right, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So good evening and welcome everyone to our very first speaker brief. My name is Sydney Tilley and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni and Family Engagement here at Eastern. The goal of these briefs is to quickly educate on a topic that our alumni are interested in, and tonight's topic, domestic food insecurity, is one that affects many in our lives and our communities, Eastern's community being no different. Tonight, we're going to hear from Liz Margolis regarding her work in food insecurity, followed by Alexis Odiase and Madeline Weeks, two members of Eastern Student Government Association. Alexis and Madeline will tell us a little more about Eastern Student Food Pantry and needed items to support our current students. At the end, we will have a time for question and answer, so if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many as we have time for before we have to wrap up this evening. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Liz Margolis. Liz is a humanitarian food security professional specializing in school meals, disaster preparedness, and gender transformation. With World Vision International, she has managed school meal programs and humanitarian responses in Angola and Burundi. She is advocacy lead for World Vision's Global Hunger Response and has served as a food security humanitarian policy advisor as a recipient of the International Mickey Leland Hunger Fellowship through the U.S. Congressional Hunger Center. Liz has also worked for the United Nations World Food Program, several U.S.-based NGOs, and speaks French, Spanish, and Portuguese fluently. She holds a master's degree in social development from the University of Sussex and a bachelor's degree in public policy and ethics from Templeton Honors College here at Eastern University. Liz, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Sydney. It is such an honor to be here and speaking to some current Eastern students and some fellow alumni. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the chance to speak about a topic that's really close to my heart. So as you shared, I actually work in international food security. And today we'll be talking more about like the domestic side, so food security in the United States. And I actually had to do a little bit of research to prepare this presentation, just since it's a little bit of a sidestep from my work, but I'm definitely going to weave them together and share a tiny bit about the work that I've been doing with World Vision too. So today we're going to discuss really just data that is available. So like the most recent available data on the topic and existing narratives that are being used in the media, in society, in the policy world, in the whole sector of development. So I really just wanted to kind of start this presentation like prefacing it. I'm not sharing my opinions. I'm just sharing some information that I have access to. And I think in the spirit of, learning and academics and sharing with students and alumni, I want you all to really form your own opinions about the data that I present today. So let's just start basically, what is food insecurity? Sometimes we hear this term a lot and we might think it's the same as hunger, but I think hunger, it really kind of refers to the feeling of being hungry. Whereas food insecurity is like a state where you consistently lack access to a healthy food or an affordable diet. And this can be something that is acute or chronic. So it can be kind of short or long term. So I just wanted to kind of clarify, like I'm going to be saying food insecurity a lot over the next 20 minutes. So what do I mean? I'm really talking about someone's state as a person in society and how they are able to access the nutritious food that they need. So also, Sydney, I'm going to give you my slides at the end so that people can like check the references and see all of the sources. So if anyone wants to see the sources, they are there and you can see them afterwards. So I just wanted to start like setting the scene, like what is the state of hunger and food insecurity in the United States? So 34 million people in the United States are food insecure, and 9 million of them are children. And these figures are from 2021, so they're the most recent available data, but they might not be so accurate just because things could have changed over the last 2 years. So even though we might say only 34 million people are like food insecure, 49 million people are relying on food programs last year. And so the food assistance programs that we have support tons of families, people of all kinds of economic and demographic backgrounds that do rely on this food assistance in order to meet their food needs. And this could include people of like the lower middle class who are also maybe not considered food insecure, but are definitely still trying to figure out how to make ends meet. So 100% of US counties have food insecurity. This is data from the US government. So they know 100% of the counties have food insecurity. And part of this is in the rural communities. So you might see stats that say that rural communities are especially hard hit by hunger. I think that we need to kind of talk about the rural poor and the urban poor because they're definitely facing different challenges. So I think the key point here, and this is a well-established fact, is that hunger exists in the United States as a result of systemic racial injustice. So we really need to go to the root causes, and this is something we're going to talk about a lot. What's driving food insecurity? What's causing it? So in the United States, we see a lot of issues related to systemic racial injustice, and hunger is one that kind of brings them all together because it's so interlinked with people's housing status, economic status, whether or not they're living in poverty, etc. And I think when we're talking about like rural versus urban poor, we really need to talk about food deserts. So maybe you haven't heard of this term, but a food desert is where it's an area where people cannot easily access fresh food. or affordable produce. So this is typically like a feature of urban areas where you'll see like people that have been intentionally marginalized, discriminated against, or are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And a lot of this goes into the history of how Black and African American communities have been treated in the United States from a policy perspective. So there has been a history of redlining. There has been a history of kind of discriminatory policies towards predominantly Black neighborhoods that has resulted in these neighborhoods now being food deserts and not having access to nutritious food. So this is a little bit more of a characteristic of urban food insecurity, but rural areas, they also struggle to access supermarkets, right? So I think the challenges there are similar and interlinked, but perhaps not exactly the same. So, I'm gonna let us like look at this slide for a second just to like take it in, because I'm kind of throwing some data at you. I will start by talking about comparing apples and oranges. So I mentioned that the data for the United States that's available is from 2021. The data available for the other countries is more recent, and it's assessed through like a food insecurity framework that isn't applied in the United States. So for our data scientists, like this is a little bit challenging to compare, but I still think it's really fruitful and interesting to look at, since my focus is international food insecurity. So looking at just like the column with the millions, like the nominal number of how many millions of people, this is heavily influenced by population. The United States has a massive, massive population. So for 10% of the United States population to be food insecure is enormous, in my opinion, and unacceptable, which we'll get to. But I think also we need to note that the next three countries are three of the four most populous countries on the African continent. So it makes sense that you have huge numbers of millions of people who are food insecure in Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia. I think that the population percentage is a much more useful indicator for us to actually compare like how many people, just because the sizes of the countries and the populations vary so much. And another interesting note about the populations, like for all of the countries on the lower part of the list, Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Syria, these are countries that have had massive numbers of their populations leaving the country as refugees. So the percentage of the population which remains was already socioeconomically disadvantaged and didn't have the means to leave the country, because those who did have left. So we might see some distortion, I think, among all of these numbers, but to me, it's very interesting, I think, to compare. So I want to take us to the last column, right? Cause. What is causing hunger? Like, for those of us who read the news, we see every day, like, world hunger is rising, it's on the rise, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals. We're supposed to be decreasing hunger. We're supposed to be working towards zero hunger, and yet we see it rising every day. So in Nigeria, yes, there's insecurity. It's a huge population. The same is true in DRC, and that is probably one of the main causes behind such high numbers of food insecure people. But I mean, all of the other countries, there's an active conflict going on, or there was just a change in government that was not democratic. So you have coup d'etat, conflict. So, I mean, maybe I probably like read the news a little bit more than the average person, and maybe you're not like following what's going on in these countries, and that's totally fine. But I think there are a lot of political reasons why these countries have the highest amount of food insecure people in the world. And that really leads me to this quote I think is very poignant. Hunger is a political issue. It's something that I hear a lot. And when we talk about the causes and the drivers of hunger and food insecurity, I think it's difficult to arrive at any conclusion other than this one, that hunger is a political issue. It really doesn't need to exist, and it really doesn't need to exist in the United States. So first, let's just continue with this global lens. Like, what's the narrative? What are people saying? How do we explain why hunger is continuing to rise despite a $1 billion industry that's working to end it? So the drivers, we always talk about the 3 Cs, the 4 Cs, so conflict, climate change, COVID, rising cost of living, rising cost of food. This is a common narrative, right? And nearly the entire development humanitarian sector is beating this drum. And it's true. These are the drivers. So this is why hunger is increasing, because really we don't have the accountability systems for some of the causes that I was mentioning in the last slide. Accountability for conflict, accountability for insecurity or for coup d'etat. So these are some of the things driving it. But when we want to think about causes, I think we do need to go deeper, and we need to think about geopolitical power dynamics, especially considering, so colonialism went on for how many hundreds of years, right? Literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of exploitation. And then only in the last few decades, kind of 1950s, 1960s, did we start to decolonize. So you have hundreds of years of exploitation and then a few decades of more autonomous rule. And I think we need to go deeper to examine like how the geopolitical power dynamics have truly changed and have they been transformed since decolonization took place. So again, these are just some of the narratives that people are saying, academics are saying, and I do encourage you to look more deeply into them. But I think it's easy to see that the geopolitical power dynamics haven't really changed since colonialism more formally ended, and it's become neocolonialism. It has transformed into a new way of maintaining the subjugation and the power dynamics that were established under the colonial system. So the United States plays a huge part in this. I mean, some people might think that the United States has a different responsibility because of the way that European countries had colonized the world, but this isn't the case. I mean, the United States actually took over colonies from Spain, from the UK, like we literally bought their military bases. So I think there's a lot to explore there in terms of the history of how things played out. But I just wanted to highlight a few facts about like the United States' current standing in the world. So it's the richest country in the world. It has the largest GDP of any country. It's the largest donor for overseas development assistance, meaning the United States gives the largest amount of money in millions or billions of dollars to food assistance for other countries, and yet still has 10% of its population living in food insecurity. And as we know, it's also a global military superpower. I mean, it has an empire. It has the most military bases of anywhere in the world. So why do we have hunger in the richest country in the world? I want to just add to some of the things I've been saying by pointing out a couple headlines that we've been seeing this year. So my intention here is not to be partisan, but just to point out some of the things that are being proposed by our elected officials. So there's been a lot of controversy within the Republican Party just this year, in the last couple of months, over the provision of domestic food assistance and many proposed cuts to SNAP, proposed cuts to school lunches, proposed cuts to WIC. These are some of the biggest and best known food assistance programs in the United States. These are proposed cuts, right? So these are just individual elected officials who are making these policy proposals. This doesn't mean that these bills went through, but I think it shows how the social safety net that exists in the United States is under attack and is much less developed than social safety nets we see in other countries that have way less wealth than the United States. So I do think we need to question why we don't have a better social safety net in this country, because the issue is not funding. The issue is where the funding is going. So here's a little more data. Sorry if it's too data heavy. Ultimately, I mean, the causes of food insecurity in the United States are complex. And with poverty, sometimes you have a chicken egg scenario, which came first: poverty, food insecurity, and people who have experienced unemployment, lack of affordable housing, lack of regular housing or consistent employment, as well as the whole mess of healthcare, maybe who have chronic health conditions, etc. People are a lot more vulnerable to experiencing food insecurity. And as we can see in the graphic on the right, I mean, this really does come down to racial demographic. And I think there are absolutely systemic and historical reasons for that. So I've highlighted with the red arrows kind of where are the groups that we see the highest prevalence. So the farther that the blue is out, that's the higher prevalence of food insecurity in this demographic group. So in the first group, I wonder if you can see my mouse circling. Single women with children are experiencing food insecurity at a much higher rate than any other group. Maybe this is due to the United States pro-birth policies that aren't accompanied by a robust social safety net. I encourage you to do your own research on that, but that would be my personal take. Looking at the section under race and ethnicity, again, we see substantiated fact that this is absolutely something rooted in racial systemic discrimination, consistent with much higher rates of food insecurity among Black and Hispanic groups, especially compared to the white group, as you can see. Now, coming back to the rural versus urban poor kind of dichotomy that I was discussing earlier, it's not too different. It's a little bit closer, these two lines here. And I would guess that the reason the urban poor, like people living in principal cities, are experiencing higher rates has to do with population density, because so many more people do live in urban areas than in rural ones. I think it's also interesting by the regions of the US, you see the highest prevalence in the South. Again, I can conjecture as to why this might be. I think it definitely merits further research into the history and the policy and why these trends exist. And also why the United States has allowed these trends to exist, because this data is theirs. I got this from the government, like they know. So how are they using this data to inform their policy decisions? I think it's a really key question. And we'll talk about that a lot more on my slide after this one with advocacy. But before I move on, I just wanted to talk about like what resources exist. How many government food assistance programs are there? Because the awareness of these programs isn't very good, and sometimes they're highly stigmatized. So I think it's important. Some of these programs might be really well known. You've probably heard of SNAP, you've probably heard of WIC, probably know about national school lunch programs. So I just wanted to share like some information about this, because I think this is really useful and not widely shared. People often aren't aware of what kind of government help might exist if they are struggling. And we do have this idea in US American culture that if you're struggling, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So you just need to work harder and do it on your own. And some people might be eligible for government assistance and not take advantage of that due to stigma and due to other cultural mentalities. So spreading awareness is super, super important. I think that's one thing that we can definitely do for free. So what can we do? So many things we can do. So I mentioned I work in advocacy, right? And I think advocacy, you can advocate to a lot of different actors, and it depends like what do they have the decision-making power over, what can they actually change. So I think just a few like great advocacy acts for our government is to improve the food assistance programs that are available so that more vulnerable people can be eligible, since the eligibility is definitely too narrow. At the same time, some people might not be taking advantage of it due to other factors, but some people who should be eligible aren't. And this is a massive problem in our social system that really needs to be addressed by the government. I do believe that they're responsible. And maybe you don't, if you don't think the government has responsibility over these things, there's still like plenty other spaces in the social circle and civil society, systems of community care. But before I move on, I think it's really important to point out, narratives about cutting federal funding and having the states provide this service instead, especially around school meals, makes rights subject to a zip code. And this is a problem we see consistently in the United States, where what kind of services you can access or rights you can exercise depend on your zip code, which is not fair or equal or equitable. So I think it would be very worthwhile to advocate for consistent federal funding to provide nutritious food to all school children. This is something that Michelle Obama during her husband's presidency, made huge progress on. She literally revitalized school meals and changed them substantially to make them much more nutritious. She started the Food Corps program. And during Trump's presidency, following that, a lot of those programs were completely cut. They were no longer funded. And so we may have seen even a regression in the nutritious quality of school meals. I know my school meals weren't very nutritious when I was in school 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, the last point about advocacy, I think we should really pressure the private sector to bring grocery stores into areas that are disadvantaged and into food deserts. It just doesn't make sense that there's no place that people can access fresh food. So I think that we really should like start calling on grocery store chains directly, especially ones like Aldi, that they're like known for providing affordable produce. Like, why aren't they serving these communities? Why don't they see this as an opportunity to expand their market? I think there's a real business case there. So I'm like, we need to do this advocacy. So yeah, next I want to kind of talk about what like NGOs and civil society can do, because they're separate from the political sphere, more so in the social sphere. And many of them are already filling these gaps directly. So the one that I work for, World Vision, it's a big Christian NGO. It's one of the biggest NGOs in the world, literally. It's huge. And they meet a lot of people's food needs. But ultimately, this is like a day-to-day thing. So we can feed people today, we can save lives today, but we have to look longer term. And that's why I really believe in the power of policy change, because we do need to address the food system gaps that are preventing these people from being able to meet their own food needs, including their economic livelihoods, like if they can't afford food, but also just the availability of food and the production and the transport of it. So yeah, when I went to Angola and Burundi, I had the chance to work on some of these food systems gaps, and it was really amazing. You saw a picture of me already. That was from a food distribution at a school. So that mother who was standing with me, she had 5, 6 children in that school, and she was picking up food rations for all of them to meet their food needs for the next month. But once that program ended, how was that mom going to continue to feed her children? So I do think like we can celebrate the work that we're doing to like feed people today and meet their hunger and food needs today, but we really do have to have a longer term vision. Okay, so that brings us to community care, right? We have the power right now to create systems of community care and actually come together and not wait for the government to act, because they probably won't. They've already shown us what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do and what they're okay with and willing to let continue in their own country. So we really do need to, I really believe in mutual aid. I think it should be parallel to the government acting, and I think we should call on the government to do more because they should, and they have the money to. It's all about political will. Hunger is a political problem. But yeah, I love that we're all here today because of the food bank that was started by my friend Zaya Martin while I was studying at Eastern, and it continues. I think it's beautiful that this legacy is living on, and Eastern students and alumni already are creating a system of mutual aid and community care so that we can help provide for our neighbors and friends who are experiencing food insecurity or are struggling to access nutritious food. And yeah, you can use your time or your money to donate or volunteer and participate in these systems of community care and cultivate them and grow them. And I think that's a really, really worthwhile effort. So thanks for hearing my spiel. I'll take a few questions if you want. I want to share this picture that I took of a schoolgirl in Burundi. She was just about to eat her lunch and she was very happy. So I'll leave it there. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for sharing, Liz. We appreciate it. Let me jump back to our slides. Here we go. And then, so I want to pass it over now to Alexis Odiase and Madeline Weeks. They are both current students. They work in student government right here at Eastern, and they're going to share a little bit more about our students' experience and how that student food pantry does help our current students.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am a senior currently on Eastern's campus. I am working with student government as executive board's secretary. I also work with student development in a few levels within school. I got involved with student government during my sophomore year, which was actually during the time I believe Saya Martin was also in the board. And traditionally, the pantries on campus was started in the health center, who was supplied by our health center staff. And you can speak to Miss Demona there if you wanted to ask her any questions about how she got her materials and like what they do and how they started. But was picked up by Zaya and became a campus-wide initiative because we are a hunger-free campus. I worked with Miss Sally up in student development to supply the pantries across campus, and we currently have 4 different locations. The first one being in the Walton lobby outside of the old SGA office, one being in Goth Kitchen, the other being in the health center, which is still now supplied by the health center, and the other one being in KG. Various things that we have put in the pantries are just prepackaged items and quick to grab snacks and food. We do this mainly because of there were instances where we have students who their swipe cards or the ID cards they use when you want to go get food from either Zyme or Breezeway or from the Dining Commons have malfunction or they don't work. And sometimes there were cases where students would go the whole day without having eaten lunch or breakfast, and they had to be on campus, for their classes, and they weren't able to have anything to eat. And we've seen that the pantries, especially in the Walton location, are very helpful for students because it's easy to grab, it's available, and everyone knows where they are. Or if you're across campus or where we have freshman housing now being in KG or Goff, it's helpful for when students aren't able to run to the store and get food, or if they don't have it like accessible to them, or if it's just not something, that's in their reach, or they're not able to, excuse me, get across campus. It's something that they have that's kind of like a backup. Or if they don't have, something just really available for them, they can grab something and they just have that to supply them. And now I can pass on to Madeline because she is now going to take over for me for the pantry initiative.
Hello, I am Madeline Weeks and I am a junior. I am the vice president for the SGA executive board. And last year, Alexis did everything with the pantry. She was the one ordering all the supplies, staying in contact with everyone on campus. And so this year she will be passing this on to me and hopefully helping me out a bit as well. And so as she mentioned, we have several pantries across campus. My freshman year, I wasn't officially on a part of SGA. I was a student worker for them. And so I saw some of the things that Zaya was doing, and he definitely had a great vision for Eastern and saw the issue of, again, as Alexis was mentioning, different things with meal swipes. Also, there are different breaks that we have. Like fall free days or winter break or different times. And there are certain times when the DC is not even open. So it's not even an option if your meal swipes are having problems. And so while we do want to have snacks in the pantries, we also want to try to have things that are more nutritious. It is harder to do that because since we're all in dorm rooms, we generally need to have things that are microwavable or again, can be sitting in the pantry on the shelves for a good amount of time. So that's harder if you want to have fresh produce or something like that. So different things we found are macaroni cups or microwavable rice, ramen, even just bottled water or canned soup can be really helpful. And so I definitely have seen that this is helpful. It's also helpful, again, that there are many pantries across campus. Because sometimes you may need something later at night and it could be difficult if it's only in one place. And especially having it in KG and in Goth, these are both freshman dorms. So it can be harder while you're getting used to things, trying to figure things out, maybe trying to figure out financial plans. Having especially those pantries on this side of campus or on the by the freshman dorms is especially helpful. Yeah, I don't know, Alexis, is there anything else you want to add connected to the pantry?
Um, not really. Just that we would like to have more filling options, but it is hard, like you mentioned, to have only things that are non-perishable, like canned soup and ramen. But we would like to take more ideas from anyone who has them about things that we can have that are more filling for the pantry. So we have like a long list of just things that are like cookies, granola bars, crackers, but other things we would like to include, like only in the golf pantry we can have frozen items because it's the kitchen. They have a freezer in there, like Jimmy Dean's breakfast sandwiches. But anything else that is more filling or like a full meal that we could include, we would like to take more ideas for.
And then just another thing, as you can see on the slide there, we do have many food options, but we also do have things like toothpaste, lotion, just regular hygiene items that you may need. So those are also beneficial for students to have on campus as well.
Sydney, you're muted.
Sorry, I clicked that and apparently it did not unclick. So thank you so much for all that information, Madeline and Alexis and Liz as well too, for just helping us understand how we can make a difference in the lives of the current students. I want to give you the opportunity that if you do plan to attend homecoming this year, we'd like to offer you the chance to purchase and donate one of these needed items for our pantry. We're going to be collecting these pantry items at every homecoming event, and we would love to see our alumni care for our current students in that way. So right now we are going to move into just a short time of Q&A, but for now I will leave this slide up so that you can take notes of any needed items that you could grab when you're hopefully doing your weekly shopping that you could bring by during homecoming. We'd love to show some love to our Eastern students that way. So I will open it up, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and if not, we will wrap up.
Thank you so much, Sydney and Madeline and Alexis. I have a question. I'm an alumni who can't attend homecoming in person, but I would love to support the food pantry. Is there any way I can make a donation?
So we are currently working on that option, and I will be sending that out. We are making sure that the options that we offer, we're able to figure out the best way to do that so that it does get to the student food pantry and that we can utilize it for what it's designated for. So I will be following this. I'll send out this recording, and with that, I will have information. We'll also update the Eastern University homecoming website, which is eastern.edu/homecoming. And you'll see right at the top there, we do have this list of needed items, and we will put a note on there for how some of our alumni that can't make it back can help donate, because we want to offer that opportunity to everyone.
Great. Thank you so much.
Going to give it one more minute here, and if you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat, and otherwise we will wrap up for this evening. All right, so I see that we have a question from Brandy. Brandy wants to thank everyone so much for sharing. Brandy works at Eastern and is wondering if there's a spot that she can drop off donations on campus. So I'm going to let Alexis and Madeline answer that. Our office, the alumni office in Ott, is always an option. We will get it to the pantry, but that might not be the fastest way to get it there. So Alexis and Madeline, do you have a place where staff members can drop off needed items?
We are currently in the process of changing our office space or moving offices. So I would have to get back to you on if we can have a drop-off location just yet. Currently, if you do have anything you would like to donate to us, we would probably appreciate you just sending us an email first. And if you can come to campus, probably to the student development office upstairs in Walton, I'd communicate with Sally and just ask her like if we have space like up there to keep things.
All right, and so with that, I think we are going to go ahead and wrap up for this evening. That's all the time we have. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, as well as, again, just offer a special thank you to Liz, Alexis, and Madeline for sharing your expertise in each of these matters and helping us understand how we can support our current students and just everyone in our community, honestly. We hope to see everyone at homecoming this year. It'll be October 11th through the 14th on campus. We have many great events. I already mentioned that URL, but I'm going to say it again, eastern.edu/homecoming for that full list of events going on. We'd love to have you back on campus, and we'd love it if you came back, or even if you're far, to be able to support our current students. We hope to see you all, and we hope everyone has a great night. Thank you so much.